February is a significant month for Access, the Assault Care Center extending shelter and support, the regional nonprofit organization that helps survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and other types of violence. The organization started out as one telephone line here in Ames and has grown into an organization serving several counties in central Iowa. This month, Access is celebrating its 45th anniversary, and congratulations on a great story in the Tribune as well to kick off the month. To celebrate this, Access is commemorating historical landmarks and people who made this organization possible with an oral history project called Accessing Our History. KHOI and Access staff have been recording testimonials from people involved with Access throughout the years, and we're pleased to share some of this in a 3-part series here on Local Talk. Tess Cody, the executive director of Access, and Courtney Palmersheim, the development coordinator and the producer of the History Project, were here last month to introduce the project, and we talked a little bit about the most central part of the work of the organization, the work of the advocates. Today, Courtney has returned for a second installment in the series. Welcome back, Courtney, and it's good to have you back. Courtney, again, is the development coordinator and producer for Accessing Our History Project. Briefly, before we get into the project, Courtney, please describe again exactly what Access is and what you do, just in case somebody's listening that doesn't know you.
Yeah, thanks for having me back again. So Access provides free confidential services to victims of domestic and sexual violence, as well as homicide and other violent crimes. Access can provide a wider range of services. Really what Access advocates do is listen to the person, inform them of all of their options, and support them in the path that they choose to go down. Just to name a few things that Access can help with, Access has 24/7 helplines. They can provide guidance through the court system, as well as other systems like the university and healthcare systems. Access can help find stable housing, and Access advocates can also just simply listen to you and hear your story.
Thank you. And you're developing a page on your website for this project, right? For this history project.
Yep. So our website is assaultcarecenter.org. And we wanted to make sure that everything accessing our history has a place to live publicly so that anyone can read and listen to the amazing stories that we've been collecting. You can find that on our website by hitting donate in the upper right-hand corner, and then you'll see a tab called Accessing Our History. And there lives all the stories, upcoming events, and ways to be involved with our project.
Okay, thank you. And before we get started, to you, the listener, just please be advised that this conversation involves topics of sexual assault and domestic violence, which can trigger emotional responses. So, Courtney, tell us a little bit about Local Talk's installment today of Accessing Our History Project.
Yeah, thank you, Ursula. It's good to be back. Today, we want to go back to the beginning of Access back in the 1970s. You, Ursula Rudenberg, founded Access in 1976 and served as its first paid coordinator. Ursula's reasoning for doing this were based in her own need for rape crisis services in Ames after she herself experienced being raped. Not finding any services in this area, Ursula set out to establish a service for her own well-being, not knowing that her actions would have ripple effects on survivors for years and years to come. Here's an excerpt from what you told us when we recorded you, Ursula.
So by necessity, I ended up, figuring out how to do it because I just needed to have a rape crisis center in my vicinity, and there was none. And so making it was better than not having one at all. It wasn't a hugely altruistic thing. My idea wasn't I'm going to go into Ames, Iowa and, establish a service that isn't there for the better public. I don't think that thought crossed my mind. I just needed to have a rape crisis center around, and this was the only way that I could get one.
What we heard here from you, Ursula, and from others was about bravery and perseverance that were needed at the beginning to push through the societal norms of the time. and that it was necessary to really take risks and to be a leader in a climate where the people around you didn't believe violence against women was real, or that any organization was needed to address violence against women.
So, Courtney, you brought a guest with you today. Could you introduce who you brought?
Yeah, so I have Lynn Koch here. She is our volunteer and intern program coordinator. Thank you so much for joining us, Lynn.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so the clip we just heard about Ursula is about how she founded Access on the basis of AIMS not having any resources for violence survivors. Do you think now in 2020 that AIMS has enough resources for survivors?
You know, that's such a loaded question because I think there's so much more than there was, but I still think there's always room for growth. You know, we have great collaborations within the community, but I think our biggest strength and sometimes our biggest weakness is our community. And by that I mean it's individuals. We need individuals who believe victims, who support victims, who aren't afraid to speak out in that support. A lot of times we see the support through donations, we see the support through community posts, community activism, awareness opportunities, which is wonderful because it speaks to the victim themselves. And in that voice, I think that's the support that the victims need the most.
Definitely. Thank you. So when Ursula started Access as a nonprofit organization, she needed a mentor. She found this in George Belitzos, the founder and former executive director of Youth and Shelter Services. George was able to give her advice since he himself had gone through some similar experiences when he introduced YSS, also a new human service built to meet a need in our community. In this clip, George describes how there was less awareness about the need for human services in the 1970s.
There was a lot of realization at that time in Ames that this city has its head in the sand as far as the problems of young people. Women were just for the first time getting recognized as people who count, and women's consciousness raising was just blooming. And the springboard for all this was the Vietnam War, and people, this was at the tail end, and people were organizing, people were talking about problems in their own community for the first time, and it was being recognized, just like the runaway and homeless youth that I was serving. Women at that time in particular, and LGBT people were not, it didn't count for much. And the struggles that we went through ourselves, or that women, as second-class citizens, the same for LGBT people, we were much more sensitive to what was going on in our country and in our environment and in our city. And there was a lot of anger at that time. And these are people who, instead of being angry, said, let's do something to make this better.
So that was George Belitzos, founder and former executive director of Youth and Shelter Services, speaking about Central Iowa in the 1970s, when awareness about the need for numerous social services was still just in the fledgling stage. And this is Local Talk on KHOI Community Radio. I'm your host for today, Ursula Rudenberg, and I'm here today with Courtney Palmersheim from Access. She's a development coordinator, and she's the producer of a history project that is being conducted by Access this year, celebrating the 45th anniversary of the organization. And with her is Lynn Koch, volunteer and intern coordinator for Access. Courtney?
Yeah, so we have been playing clips from oral testimonials taken from people who have worked at Access throughout the years. Access and KHOI partnered to make these recordings here in the KHOI studio. So, Lynn, when Ursula was working on founding the incorporated organization that is now known as Access, George Belitzos partnered with her to give her advice on how to create a new and needed service in the community. Can you speak to the value of having good community partners in this work?
I do believe that good community partners are very important. You know, I've been doing this work for almost 21 years, and I can tell you that the relationships that we have been able to build within our community that fosters that support for victims is important, namely law enforcement. Having that resource, having law enforcement that have the Start by Believing campaign, that are vocal in their support for victims, who are there to listen and offer that option and resource, is important and impactful for victims. We have multiple collaborations within the community with other nonprofits that are there to support, whether it be financial, assist with additional counseling. It's so helpful to have that. We have that with YSS. I know that we have great support through our United Way. Oftentimes, it's helping and assist victims in just navigating the resources and finding access. So having the collaborations within the community, excuse me, to assist and believe victims, assist victims in making the reports, assisting victims in finding the services, navigating their way to access so that we can work through the community to support them as well.
Thank you, Lynn. George Blitzow described the social climate in the 1970s in Ames, and it was during these years that a volunteer group of forward-thinking people got together to form what was then called the Mid-Iowa Rape Crisis Center. They did this before the organization we now know as Access was created, and they were the forerunners, forging the conceptual foundation that made Access possible. This group of people met at the YWCA on campus and used a suicide crisis line to double up as a rape hotline to reach people who had experienced sexual violence. They also tried to generate public attention to this issue. A woman named Mary Ellen Stone led this volunteer group, the Mid-Iowa Rape Crisis Center. We wanted you to hear her describe in her own words what those days were like, partly to illustrate the bravery that was needed and partly to help us all appreciate what we have today.
What's hard to overstate now is what a foreign idea this was in Ames. We were going against the grain, so there was just automatically, for the most part, a lot of resistance. It felt overwhelming and I think just a little daunting about putting myself out there like that, because it raises a lot of personal questions, a lot of defensiveness, because the attitudes were so disbelieving that sexual assault was such an issue. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, right? Which was fine, but because we just sort of launched ourselves into this, and I would say that you don't know what you're doing doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. And I think that's what we were doing. And I think at times it just felt like there was very little support by way of just recognition that this makes sense. It was not a particularly welcoming discussion in most of Ames. It was just sort of the lack of any affirmation that became really difficult. I remember doing a lot of media interviews just talking about sexual assault, talking about what we were trying to do, and that did help us generate a little bit more momentum to the extent that we had more victims coming forward to show that, I mean, we're not just sort of making this up.
That was Mary Ellen Stone, leader of the Mid-Iowa Rape Crisis Center, a group of volunteers who were essentially the forerunners of the organization that we now know as Access. In addition to the skepticism they faced, they were really up against impossible odds without paid staff or an incorporated organization. The difficulty and complexity of this work requires those things. Eventually, Mary Ellen and Ursula found each other and worked together to hand this effort over to the process of incorporating an organization, which is now known as Access. So, Lynn, do you ever feel like Mary Ellen did in the 70s? Like you don't know exactly what you're doing, but you know that you need to keep trying and keep pushing forward?
I think that that's exactly what victim advocacy feels like. You know, one of the things that I've tried to impart in the volunteers and interns as they begin this journey is that you will never be the expert. The experts, honestly, are the victims and survivors that we work with, and we learn from them every day. It is not something that I think is an overnight fix. You can't take the course. You can't have all the knowledge. You need to keep striving to build that knowledge and continue to work and learn. and push forward. I do think we've made great strides. I think there's wonderful advantages that weren't necessarily there in the 70s, but I don't think we can take that for granted, and I don't think we should ever stop trying.
Lynn, how do you know that you need to keep pushing despite community backlash? And how do you know that you've made the right decision?
I think it's always something that we have to remember is that it needs to be victim survivor centered. If I'm making a decision, if I'm moving forward, if I'm speaking, I need to remember who and why I'm speaking. And it's for the victims, it's for the survivors. We work very often in what I call the gray. There's not necessarily clear black and white, yes or no, 1, 2, 3, this is the steps you take. But there are always ways that you can make a difference and move forward. There's always something that you can do. And if you do that with the victim first, I think that's the model that helps you to guide you in the right decisions.
Thank you for joining us to comment today, Lynn, volunteer and intern coordinator.
Thank you.
It's good to combine the voices from Access Past with yours as current staff at Access. And
thank you, Courtney Palmershon, for coming here and sharing this history project with us. And we're talking with Courtney Palmershon and Lynn Koch from Access, who are exploring the history of Access, which is something near and dear to my heart because I was there at the beginning. So it's kind of a moment to reflect upon my life too. Lynn, you mentioned that the struggle to, in a way, I don't think justifies the right word, but to somehow, feel community support for this kind of work never really feels completely solid. That there's always a sense of having to forge into territory that's difficult to face. Do you find today that Access is able to get more volunteers and interns than than it might have in the past? Since you're the volunteer and intern coordinator, right?
Yes.
How is it today? How is it today getting volunteers to work there?
I do think that it is easier in the sense because the language is there. The conversations are in the community and in the education support systems. So people are reaching out first because they're wanting to make that difference. They're wanting to have a voice in the work that we do. They're wanting to feel that they're making that difference and providing a service that matters and follows the passions that they have. So it is easier. I do think that the other piece of that is that it's also not pretty work. It's harder work. It's not soft and cuddly work. So it poses those struggles in the sense that, yes, we work with victims, all victims of from children to elderly. But it doesn't have that soft, cozy focus. It's not the feel good at the end of the day.
It's more kind of like feel disturbed by the end of the day, right?
Right, because there's always more work to do, which isn't a bad thing, but you can't call yourself complete. It's not done. Yes, you've completed this activity, you've brought this awareness, you're providing a service. One of the things that I think is so very important is very early in my journey in this work, I was asked, what's important if you only have 10 minutes? Quite frankly, the 10 minutes is what's important. It isn't what happens after the 10 minutes, but it happens within the 10 minutes, and then the next 10 minutes, and the next hour, and the next day. So it's building on what we have and what we can give and how we show the support. And it's not going to end, and it shouldn't end. I would love to say that it could end, but it will end when violence ends, and I'm not sure that we're there yet. So I think the support needs to continue, and it's a good feeling to provide that support, but it's also a springboard because you need to continue that support.
Yeah, it's very hard work, and yet people do volunteer to do that work. About right, at Access?
Yes, we have wonderful volunteers and interns. We couldn't do the work we're doing without that support. Anything from clerical support to providing support through our crisis lines, assisting with that one-on-one peer counseling, support through the court system, providing that education and awareness. That is huge. We need the support that we get from our volunteers. And I'm so grateful and energized every day that I work with them.
About how many volunteers does Access have today?
That varies. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've had to shift how we use our volunteers and interns. But we have well over 300 to 1,500 hours of volunteer hours yearly. And they're utilized throughout our agency. Because we're doing a lot of our services virtually, it's enabled our volunteers and interns to provide that support to the agency. We've had some that have provided the support last semester when they were out of state, but they were still able to provide that support.
And Courtney, you're an intern at Access. You've been there for 2 years now, right?
Yeah, I started as an intern 2 years ago and then transitioned to full-time about 1 year ago. So I know what it's like being in those shoes. Yep.
So what brought you to Access? Why did you choose this type of internship?
Just because this is something that in my personal life I have connections to and that I'm passionate about. So when I saw that I could tie that to my professional work, it just seemed like the perfect fit.
Uh-huh. And do you ever find that you come up against that sense that Mary Ellen had, that you're pushing against, you're pushing a topic that people would rather not hear about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I, like Lynn has said, like we've made so many strides, and there are some people that are so open to that conversation and so ready to learn and make changes, but you definitely come across some groups or some people that just aren't ready to hear it quite yet and just need a little more work to be done.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, thank you. We're speaking about the work at Access, and I don't know if you remember this, Courtney, but Lynn, I remember one of the when we were speaking with Mary Ellen Stone, who we heard from just recently, talking about how in the beginning nobody really wanted to hear about rape and sexual assault back in the 1970s. When we were interviewing her, she mentioned that she works now in Washington State at a rape crisis center and a sexual abuse center. And she mentioned that in the state of Washington, one of the airlines, and I don't remember which one it was, but one of the airlines, which is based in Washington, had agreed to make it part of their routine announcement at the beginning of the flight that if anybody in the airplane experienced something that they felt was an inappropriate advance on the airplane, that they should report it to the stewardesses and the flight attendants. And I thought that was really interesting. That's kind of taking it to the next level, right? It's taking it beyond just justifying the existence of a center to deal with sexual abuse, but it's really beginning to make it part of the public conversation.
I like that they also normalized that it could happen, and it could happen anywhere, and it could happen to anyone. That's
right. It normalizes it. So it's really kind of taking it the next step so that someday perhaps it won't take as much bravery to talk about the topic as it does now.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you both for the work you're doing and for being today's leaders in this area. I've long since stopped working in the field, and so I am very, very appreciative that both you, Courtney, and Lynn have picked up the baton and keep doing the work, and really appreciate it. And we've been speaking about the history of Access, and which is the sexual abuse and violence and domestic violence care center in our area. Courtney, tell us again exactly how you can find the project online. You're going to be posting a lot of the oral histories that we've recorded on your website, right?
Yep. So you can find all of that on our website, which is assaultcarecenter.org. And then you can also like and follow our Facebook page, which is at Assault Care Center, because we started on February 1st and it goes till March 17th, 45 days. We'll be posting short snippets of our stories and peeks into our past and future, just to celebrate our 45th anniversary. And so, yep, Facebook, our website, assaultcarecenter.org, and also our YouTube channel, Assault Care Center. You can find our project in all three of those places.
Yeah, and I think we must have interviewed maybe, I don't know, at least 20 people, if not more, right?
Yeah, I was going to say somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20, maybe more.
Yeah, and very, very interesting stories, anywhere from people who were dealing in the upper management and the decision-making of how the organization was built, to people who were volunteering there as advocates or as people working, like staying there overnight to help kind of be in charge of the house there where people were living. And so not only do you really learn a lot about the emotional growth experience of working with advocacy, you also learn, at least I learned, how an organization is built. You know, what decisions have to be made along the road in this particular community to keep the organization growing. It's very interesting, the different phases that you go through, right? So
we really kind of got a good...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we got a good thread of the story. We really got a good, this is how it started, this is the middle, this is where we're at now. So It was really cool. It is really cool.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. And the other beautiful aspect of this is that women's history tends to be erased in our culture. And this is a really beautiful thing that you're really taking the care, that this organization is taking the care to document its history and give it a place, keep the story alive, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just one more time, tell us the name of the website and tell us again how Access can be reached if you need help, if you, the listener, know somebody or yourself need help with sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, or any other type of violence, right?
Yeah, so we have 24/7 helplines that you can call any time of day, and you'll get connected to an advocate who will be able to help you through your situation. I'll go ahead and list those helplines now. Our sexual abuse line is 515-292-5378. Our domestic abuse and homicide violent crime line is 515-292-0519. And our housing line is 515-292-0543. And then we also launched a live chat line on our website. It's up in the upper right-hand corner of our website, assaultcarecenter.org. You can click on that and just live chat with an advocate from Monday through Friday, 9 to 2. So that's a new way of reaching out that we also have now as well.
Okay, and again, the website, give it one more time.
assaultcarecenter.org.
Okay, and the all those phone numbers are on the website, and we'll also post them at KHOIFM.org on our homepage, along with the audio from this show. So thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure to partner with Access to celebrate this history. And this has been the second of 3 presentations from Access, the Assault Care Center Sheltering and Support, honoring their 45th anniversary. And we'll be having one more installment, exploring one other aspect of the history of Access. It's really a proud local success story that has really involved a tremendous amount of people from our community. It's really been a community effort in every sense of the word. So thank you so much. I've been speaking with Courtney Palmersheim, who is the development director for Access and also the producer of this history project, and Lynn Koch, who is the coordinator for interns and volunteers. Thank you both so much for coming.